The containment field hummed with blue energy as Amy Johnson pressed her face against the observation window. Inside the reinforced chamber, 12 feet of pure nightmare paced back and forth like a caged storm. The Kythera had been captured 6 months ago from the ruins of Colony 7, and it still moved with the deadly grace of something born to kill. Amy watched the creature's muscles ripple beneath its dark, armored hide. Its claws scraped against the metal floor with each step, leaving deep gouges that maintenance crews had to repair daily. The beast's head turned toward the window, and Amy found herself staring into eyes that burned like molten gold. Those eyes held intelligence, she realized with a start. This was no mindless monster. Cadet Johnson, step back from the window. Commander Jake Morrison's voice cut through her thoughts. The graying officer moved beside her, his weathered face grim. That thing has killed more humans than any other single creature in recorded history. Amy nodded but didn't move away. Growing up on her family's farm in Ohio, she had worked with plenty of dangerous animals. Bulls that could crush a person with one charge. Wild boars that would attack without warning. But there was something different about this creature. Something that reminded her of the abused horses her father used to rescue. "Sir, has anyone tried talking to it?" Amy asked, still watching the Kythera pace. Morrison let out a bitter laugh. "Talking? Johnson, we've had every expert in the galaxy try to communicate with that thing. Linguists, telepaths, even other alien species, it attacks anything that gets close. The only reason it's still alive is because the brass thinks it might be useful." Somehow, Dr. Lisa Carter approached from across the lab, her tablet clutched in her hands. The xenobiologist looked exhausted, her usually neat brown hair falling in messy strands around her face. "The feeding attempt failed again," she reported. "It won't touch the food. Just keeps throwing itself at the containment field." Amy frowned. "How long has it been since it last ate?" 3 weeks, Carter replied. "At this rate, it'll be dead within days." Maybe that's for the best? The military is running out of patience. The Kythera suddenly stopped pacing and turned toward them. Its nostrils flared, and Amy could swear it was studying them. The creature's head tilted slightly, almost like a curious dog. Then it opened its mouth and released a sound that made everyone in the lab freeze. It wasn't quite a roar. It was deeper, more complex. Amy had heard similar sounds before, from animals trying to communicate distress. The Kythera wasn't just angry or hungry, it was lonely. "That's new," Carter whispered, making notes on her tablet. "It's never made that sound before." Amy stepped closer to the window, ignoring Morrison's sharp look. The Kythera watched her approach, its golden eyes never leaving her face. She pressed her palm against the glass, and the creature moved closer until only the containment field separated them. "It's scared," Amy said softly. "Scared?" Morrison's voice rose in disbelief. "That thing destroyed 3 colonies. It killed over 200 Marines during its capture. Scared is the last thing it is." But Amy had spent years reading animal behavior. She saw the tension in the creature's shoulders, the way it kept glancing toward the exits. The Kythera wasn't pacing because it was aggressive. It was pacing because it was trapped and desperate. "Permission to review the capture footage, sir?" Amy asked. Morrison studied her for a long moment. "Why?" "I want to understand what happened when it was taken." "Sometimes animals act differently when they're separated from their pack." The commander's expression softened slightly. Amy's file mentioned her background in animal behavior, though he'd never paid much attention to it before. Carter the footage. The laboratory's main screen flickered to life, showing the smoking ruins of Colony 7. The Kythera stood among the wreckage, but it wasn't destroying anything. It was searching through the debris, making those same complex sounds Amy had just heard. "It's calling for something," she realized, "or someone." The footage continued, showing the moment when human forces arrived. The Kythera had tried to flee, not fight. Only when cornered did it become the killing machine that legends were made of. Even then, Amy noticed something the military analysts had missed. The creature's attacks were defensive, designed to create escape routes rather than maximize casualties. It was protecting something, Amy murmured. Or looking for something it lost, Carter looked up from her tablet. The initial reports mentioned other Kithera in the area, but they were never found. We assumed they escaped. Amy turned back to the containment chamber. The Kithera was still watching her, its massive form eerily still. She thought about the animals on her farm, how they behaved when separated from their families. The bulls became aggressive, the horses refused to eat. The dogs would howl for hours. I'd like to try something, Amy said suddenly. Morrison raised an eyebrow. Such as? Let me go in there. The laboratory fell silent. Even the humming of the containment field seemed to quiet. Carter's tablet slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. Absolutely not, Morrison said firmly. That thing will tear you apart in seconds. Amy kept her eyes on the Kithera. Sir, every approach so far has been based on the assumption that it's a mindless predator. But what if it's not? What if it's just a scared animal that's been separated from its pack? Even if that were true, which I doubt, it's still incredibly dangerous. So are the animals I work with back home, Amy replied. The key is understanding what they need. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the young cadet. Amy Johnson had scored in the top 5% of her class. But more importantly, she had shown an unusual ability to think outside standard protocols. Still, sending her into that chamber would be suicide. The answer is no, Johnson. I won't. Have a cadet's death on my conscience? Amy nodded, but she didn't look away from the Kithera. The creature was still watching her, and she could swear she saw something like hope in those golden eyes. Whatever had happened to this being, whatever it had lost, she was determined to help it find peace. The next feeding attempt was scheduled for tomorrow. Amy had until then to convince Morrison to let her try a different approach. As she watched the Kithera settle into the corner of its cell, she began forming a plan. Sometimes the most dangerous animals just needed someone to show them kindness. The containment field flickered, and the creature's eyes never left her face. Amy stood outside the containment chamber at dawn, her hands trembling slightly as she checked the safety controls one final time. Commander Morrison had spent most of the night arguing with her, but she had worn him down with logic and determination. The Kithera was dying anyway, she had pointed out. If her approach failed, they would lose nothing more than they already expected to lose. Dr. Carter monitored the readings from her console, her face pale with worry. All systems are green, she reported. But Amy, if that thing moves toward you, don't try to be a hero. The emergency extraction will pull you out in 3 seconds. Amy nodded, though she had no intention of running. She had spent hours studying the creature's behavior patterns, watching how it moved and reacted. The Kithera reminded her of Zeus, a massive bull her father had rescued years ago. Zeus had been abused by his previous owners and would charge at anyone who entered his pen. But Amy had learned that Zeus wasn't truly aggressive, just terrified and confused. The containment field flickered off, and Amy stepped into the chamber. The Kithera was pressed against the far wall, its golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Up close, the creature was even more imposing. Its claws were longer than her fingers, and its teeth could easily tear through steel. Amy took a deep breath and forced herself to remain calm. Fear would only make things worse. She had learned that lesson with every dangerous animal she had ever handled. The Kithera's nostrils flared, and she realized it was reading her scent, trying to understand what she was. Easy, she whispered, keeping her voice soft and low. I'm not here to hurt you. The Kithera's head tilted slightly, and Amy caught a glimpse of confusion in its eyes. It had expected aggression, weapons, threats. Instead, it was faced with a small human who showed no fear and spoke in gentle tones. Amy slowly lowered herself to one knee, making herself smaller and less threatening. It was a technique she had used with frightened horses, and she hoped it would work with an alien predator. The Kithera watched her every movement, its muscles coiled like springs ready to unleash destruction. You're scared, Amy said softly. You don't know where you are or what happened to your family. The creature took a step forward, its claws clicking against the metal floor. Amy's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't move. The Kithera was testing her, trying to decide if she was a threat. She had seen this behavior before in wild animals that had been cornered. "I know you're hungry," Amy continued. "But you can't eat because everything here smells wrong. Nothing feels safe." The Kithera stopped just out of reach, its massive head lowering until it was almost at her eye level. Amy could feel its breath on her face, hot and carrying the scent of something alien. Those golden eyes studied her. With an intelligence that made her forget she was facing a monster, Amy thought about her father's words when he taught her to work with difficult animals. "Every creature speaks a language," he had said. "You just have to learn how to listen." The Kithera's breathing had changed, becoming slower and more controlled. Amy realized it was no longer in attack mode. Instead, it seemed curious about this strange human who refused to run or fight. "You're not a monster," Amy whispered. "You're just lost." The creature's eyes widened slightly, and Amy saw something that made her heart race. Recognition. The Kithera understood her tone, even if it couldn't understand her words. It had been waiting for someone to speak to it without hatred or fear. Amy slowly raised her hand, palm open and empty. The Kithera's gaze focused on the gesture, and she saw its muscles tense. This was the moment of truth. Either the creature would accept her offer of peace, or it would tear her apart. "Sit," Amy said gently, using the same tone she had used with Zeus when he was ready to trust her. The effect was immediate and stunning. The Kithera's aggressive posture melted away like ice under warm sunlight. Its powerful legs folded beneath it, and it settled onto its haunches with surprising grace. The deadly predator that had terrorized 3 colonies was now sitting like an obedient pet. Behind the observation window, Amy could hear shocked gasps and the sound of Dr. Carter's tablet hitting the floor. Commander Morrison's voice crackled through the intercom, filled with disbelief. "Johnson, what just happened?" Amy kept her eyes on the Kithera, afraid that any sudden movement might break the spell. The creature was still watching her, but its expression had changed completely. Where once there had been fury and desperation, now there was something that looked almost like hope. "I think it recognizes pack behavior," Amy said quietly. "It's been waiting for someone to establish leadership." The Kithera made a soft sound, nothing like the terrifying roars it had produced before. This was almost musical, a complex series of tones that seemed to carry meaning. Amy had heard similar sounds from dogs trying to communicate with their owners. "You're trying to talk to me," she realized. "You've been trying to talk to everyone, but they were too scared to listen." Amy slowly extended her hand toward the creature. The Kithera leaned forward, its massive head approaching her palm. For a moment, Amy thought about the dozens of Marines this creature had killed, the colonies it had destroyed. But looking into its eyes, she saw only a lost soul seeking connection. The creature's forehead touched her palm, and Amy felt the warmth of its skin through the armored hide. It was the gentlest touch she had ever experienced, more careful than a butterfly landing on a flower. The Kithera was being deliberately gentle, afraid of hurting her. "There you go," Amy whispered, slowly stroking the creature's head. "You're not alone anymore?" The Kithera closed its eyes and leaned into her touch, making soft rumbling sounds that vibrated through the floor. Amy realized she was probably the first person to touch this being with kindness rather than violence. The thought broke her heart. "Johnson," Morrison's voice came through the intercom again. "How is this possible?" Amy looked up at the observation window, her hand still resting on the Kithera's head. "It's not a monster, sir. It's just an animal that's been separated from its family. Everything it's done has been out of fear and confusion." The creature opened its eyes and looked at her with what could only be described as gratitude. Amy knew that this moment would change everything. The war between humans and Kithera was based on a fundamental misunderstanding, and she had just taken the first step toward fixing it. Amy sat on the floor of the containment chamber, her back against the wall as she watched the Kithera carefully examine the meal she had brought. For the first time in weeks, the creature was actually eating. It moved slowly and deliberately, pausing between bites to look at her as if seeking approval. "That's it," Amy said softly. "Take your time." 3 days had passed since her breakthrough with the creature, and each session had revealed something new. The Kithra was far more intelligent than anyone had imagined. It had begun responding to simple commands and even seemed to understand some basic human gestures. Dr. Carter entered the chamber carrying her tablet and a portable scanner. She still moved carefully around the Kithra, but the creature no longer showed any aggression toward her. It simply watched her with curious golden eyes before returning to its meal. "The scans are remarkable," Carter said, checking her readings. "Its stress hormones have dropped to almost normal levels. Blood pressure is stable. Whatever you're doing, it's working." Amy had started calling the creature Hunter, though she kept that name to herself. The Kithra seemed to respond to the sound, tilting its head whenever she said it. She had also noticed that it moved differently now, less like a caged animal and more like a companion. "I think it's starting to trust us," Amy said, watching Hunter finish eating. "But there's something else. I think it's trying to tell us something." Hunter had been making those complex musical sounds more frequently, especially when Amy first arrived each morning. The tones seemed to follow patterns, almost like a language. Amy had been recording them, hoping to find some meaning in the sequences. Commander Morrison appeared at the observation window, his expression troubled. He activated the intercom and gestured for Amy to join him outside the chamber. She gave Hunter a gentle pat on the head before standing. "Stay here," she told the creature. "I'll be right back." Hunter settled into a resting position, its eyes following her as she left the chamber. Amy noticed that the creature seemed anxious when she was out of sight. Another sign that it had formed an attachment to her. Morrison met her in the corridor, his face grave. "We need to talk, Johnson. Admiral Collins is arriving tomorrow to see your progress. He's bringing some people from the Weapons Development Division." Amy felt her stomach tighten. "Weapons development, sir? Hunter isn't a weapon. It's a living being. I know your feelings on this, but you need to understand the bigger picture. The war with the Kithra has cost us thousands of lives. If we can use your connection with this creature to gain an advantage, we have to consider it." Amy shook her head firmly. "That would be a mistake, sir. Hunter isn't aggressive by nature. Everything it did before was because it was scared and confused. If we try to use it as a weapon, we'll just turn it back into the monster it was before." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "You've grown attached to it." "I've learned to understand it," Amy corrected. "And what I've learned is that this whole war might be based on a misunderstanding." Before Morrison could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Red lights flashed as the emergency announcement echoed through the corridors. "All personnel to battle stations. Kithra ships detected approaching our position." Amy's heart raced as she thought about Hunter alone in the containment chamber. The creature would be able to sense the tension and fear radiating from the crew. After making such progress, she couldn't let it regress back to its previous state. "Sir?" "I need to get back to Hunter," she said urgently. Morrison nodded grimly. "Go. But Johnson, if this turns into a fight, we might need your creature to help us." Amy ran back to the containment chamber, where she found Hunter pacing nervously. The creature's stress was obvious in its movements and the way it kept making those complex sounds. It rushed to her side when she entered, pressing its massive head against her shoulder. "It's okay," Amy whispered, stroking Hunter's armored hide. "I'm here." Dr. Carter burst into the lab, her face pale with worry. "Amy, we've got 3 Kithra warships heading straight for us. They're not responding to any communication attempts." Hunter suddenly became very still, its head raised and listening to something Amy couldn't hear. The creature's eyes widened, and it began making rapid, excited sounds. Amy had never heard these particular tones before. "What is it?" she asked. Watching Hunter's agitated behavior, the creature moved to the wall facing the direction of the approaching ships and pressed its head against the metal. The sounds it made became more urgent, more desperate. Amy realized with a shock that Hunter was trying to communicate with the incoming Kithra vessels. "Carter, can you boost the communication systems to transmit Hunter's sounds?" Amy asked. Quickly, what are you thinking? I think Hunter is trying to call to them. Maybe it knows who they are. Carter's fingers flew over her controls, routing the containment chamber's audio pickup through the ship's external communication array. Hunter's complex musical tones echoed through space, carrying across the void toward the approaching warships. The response was immediate. The Kithara ships slowed their approach, and similar sounds began transmitting back. Hunter became almost frantic with excitement, moving around the chamber and making increasingly complex vocalizations. "They're talking," Amy breathed. "They're actually talking to each other." Commander Morrison's voice crackled through the intercom. "Johnson, what's happening down there?" Amy looked at Hunter, who was now pressed against the wall, making soft, almost pleading sounds. The creature's entire body language had changed. It was no longer the confident predator she had come to know, but something that seemed almost desperate. "I think they're Hunter's pack," Amy said. "I think they've been looking for it." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The Kithara ships hadn't come to attack. They had come to find their missing pack member. Hunter had been calling to them for months, and they had finally heard. Hunter turned to Amy, its golden eyes filled with what looked like hope and sadness combined. The creature approached her slowly and gently touched her face with one massive claw, being careful not to hurt her. Amy understood. Hunter was saying goodbye. Admiral Peter Collins stood with his arms crossed, watching the Kithara ships hold position just outside weapon range. His steel-gray eyes moved between the tactical displays and the containment chamber where Amy continued her work with Hunter. The creature had been calling to its pack for hours, and the ship showed no signs of leaving. "This is an unprecedented opportunity," Collins said to Commander Morrison. "We have their pack leader in custody and 3 warships within striking distance. We could end this war today." Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, Cadet Johnson believes the approaching ships are here peacefully. They're trying to retrieve their missing member." "Peacefully?" Collins laughed bitterly. "Tell that to the colonists on Kepler Station. Tell that to the families of the Marines who died capturing this thing." Amy looked up from where she sat beside Hunter, having heard the conversation through the intercom. The creature sensed her distress and pressed closer to her side. Over the past few days, Hunter had become incredibly attuned to her emotions, responding to her moods like a loyal pet. "Admiral," Amy said through the communication system, "Hunter isn't a weapon. Using it against its own pack would be cruel and wrong." Collins turned toward the observation window, his expression cold. "Cadet, you've done excellent work, but you're thinking like a scientist, not a soldier. This war has cost us too much to pass up such an advantage." Dr. Carter pulled up the latest scans on her tablet. "Admiral," the psychological profile suggests, "that forcing the creature into combat would likely cause severe trauma. We could lose all the progress we've made." "Progress?" Collins stepped closer to the window. "Johnson, I want you to demonstrate this creature's combat capabilities. Order it to attack the training dummies." Amy felt her heart sink. She had known this moment would come, but she had hoped for more time. Hunter looked at her with trusting golden eyes, waiting for her guidance. The creature had no idea what the humans were planning. "Sir, I can't do that," Amy said firmly. "Hunter trusts me. I won't betray that trust." Collins's face darkened. "That's an order, Cadet." "Then I respectfully refuse, sir." The bridge fell silent. Even the tactical officers stopped their work to watch the confrontation. Amy knew she was risking her career, possibly facing court-martial, but she couldn't bring herself to use Hunter as a weapon. Hunter seemed to sense the tension in the room. The creature stood and moved protectively in front of Amy, its massive form blocking her from the observation window. It made low, rumbling sounds that Amy had learned meant it was concerned about her safety. "Stand down, creature," Collins commanded through the intercom. Hunter tilted its head, looking confused. The creature had learned to recognize human voices, but it only responded to Amy's commands. To Hunter, Collins was just another threatening human making loud noises. "It doesn't understand you," Amy explained. "Hunter only responds to me because I've earned its trust." Collins turned to his aide. Colonel Frank Davis, prepare a strike team. If the cadet won't cooperate, we'll handle this ourselves. Amy's blood ran cold. Sir, you can't. Hunter will defend itself if it feels threatened. People will get hurt. Then you'd better convince it to cooperate. Before Amy could respond, alarms began blaring again. The Kythera ships were moving, but instead of attacking, they were positioning themselves in a defensive formation. Hunter became agitated, pressing against the wall and making urgent sounds. They're responding to Hunter's distress, Amy realized. They can sense that something's wrong. Commander Morrison studied the tactical display. Sir, their weapons are powered down. They're not taking an aggressive stance, Collins ignored him. Johnson, last chance. Order that creature to demonstrate its combat abilities, or we'll do this the hard way. Amy looked at Hunter, who was watching her with complete trust. The creature had been through so much trauma already. She couldn't add to its suffering, no matter what the consequences might be. No, she said quietly. Collins nodded to Colonel Davis, who activated his communicator. Strike Team Alpha, prepare for a containment breach. Subdue the creature and extract the cadet. Amy heard the sound of boots in the corridor as armed Marines approached. Hunter's head snapped toward the door, its muscles tensing. The creature could smell the fear and aggression of the approaching soldiers. Hunter, stay calm, Amy whispered, placing her hand on the creature's head. I won't let them hurt you. The containment chamber door began to open, and 6 Marines in full combat gear entered with weapons drawn. Hunter rose to its full height, positioning itself between Amy and the soldiers. The creature's golden eyes blazed with protective fury. Stand. Down, the lead Marine ordered. Move away from the creature. Amy remained where she was. Hunter, sit, she said softly. The creature hesitated, torn between its desire to obey Amy and its instinct to protect her from the armed humans. The Marines raised their weapons, and Hunter's control finally snapped. The creature let out a roar that shook the entire chamber. It was the same terrifying sound that had once struck fear into the hearts of colonial defenders. But this time, Amy heard something different in the cry. It wasn't rage or bloodlust. It was fear and desperation. Hunter lunged forward, not to attack, but to shield Amy from the Marine's weapons. The creature's massive body absorbed the stun blasts meant for her, and it collapsed to the floor with a heavy thud. Hunter! Amy cried, dropping to her knees beside the unconscious creature. She could feel its heart beating rapidly beneath her hands, and she knew it was still alive. The Kythera ships outside immediately responded to Hunter's distress call. Their engines flared to life, and they began moving toward the human vessel. The pack had heard their members cry for help, and they were coming to rescue it. Amy looked up at the observation window where Admiral Collins stood watching. Now you've done it, she said, her voice filled with anger. You've just started a war. Collins activated the ship's weapon systems. Then we'll finish it. Amy pressed her face against Hunter's still form, feeling the creature's labored breathing. The gentle being that had learned to trust her had been betrayed by the very people she served, and now its pack was coming for revenge. The bridge erupted in chaos as the Kythera ships accelerated toward the human vessel. Warning lights flashed red while officers shouted coordinates and weapon status reports. Admiral Collins stood at the center of it all, his face set in grim determination as he prepared to give the order to fire. Amy knelt beside Hunter's unconscious form in the containment chamber, her hand resting on the creature's chest. She could feel its heartbeat growing stronger as it began to recover from the stun blasts. The Marines had withdrawn after completing their mission, leaving her alone with the being she had come to care for so deeply. Hunter, she whispered, please wake up. Your family is coming, and they're going to think we hurt you. The creature's golden eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Hunter tried to stand but stumbled, still weak from the weapon's discharge. When it saw Amy, the creature made soft questioning sounds, as if asking what had happened. I'm sorry, Amy said, fighting back tears. I tried to protect you, but they wouldn't listen. Through the observation window, she could see Admiral Collins raising his hand to give the attack order. The Kithara ships were now close enough that their weapons could tear through the human vessel's shields. In moments, both sides would be firing, and any chance for peace would die in the crossfire. Amy made a decision that would change everything. She activated the chamber's communication system and spoke directly to the bridge. "Admiral Collins, I'm requesting permission to speak to the Kithara ships." Collins paused, his hand still raised. "What?" "Let me try to communicate with them through." "Hunter, maybe we can prevent this fight." "It's too late for that, Johnson. They're already attacking." Amy looked at the tactical display and saw something the Admiral had missed. "Sir, their weapons aren't charged. They're not attacking. They're trying to rescue Hunter." Commander Morrison studied the readings more carefully. "She's right, Admiral. They're on an intercept course, but their weapon systems are cold." Collins hesitated, torn between his military instincts and the possibility that Amy might be right. The Kithara ships were now close enough to open fire, but they hadn't. Instead, they were transmitting the same musical sounds that Hunter had been making. Hunter struggled to its feet, drawn by the familiar calls of its pack. The creature moved to the wall and began responding with increasingly urgent vocalizations. Amy could hear the joy and relief in Hunter's voice as it reconnected with its family. "They're not here to fight," Amy said. "They're here to bring Hunter home." Dr. Carter checked her instruments. The bio readings from Hunter support that theory. "Its stress levels are dropping, not rising. These sounds indicate happiness, not aggression." Amy helped Hunter stand steady, supporting the creature's weight as it continued its conversation with the approaching ships. She had an idea, but it would require the Admiral to trust her completely. "Sir, I want to take Hunter to the docking bay. Let it reunite with its pack." Collins stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "You want to release our only prisoner to enemy forces?" "They're not enemies," Amy said firmly. "They're a family trying to get their missing member back." Hunter was separated during the raid on Colony 7. Everything that happened after that was just misunderstanding and fear. The Kithara ships had stopped their approach and were hovering just outside the human vessel's perimeter. Their calls to Hunter grew more complex, and Amy could hear different voices in the sounds. Multiple pack members were trying to communicate with their lost companion. Hunter turned to Amy, its golden eyes bright with hope. The creature gently touched her face with one massive claw, being careful not to harm her. In that gesture, Amy saw gratitude, affection, and a request for help. "It wants to go home," she said softly. Admiral Collins walked to the observation window, studying the tactical display. The Kithara ships remained in position, neither attacking nor retreating. Their behavior was unlike anything in the military databases. "If we release the creature, we lose our only advantage in this war," Collins said. Amy shook her head. "Sir, what if there doesn't have to be a war? What if Hunter can help us make peace?" Commander Morrison stepped forward. "Admiral, our intelligence suggests that the Kithara attacks have been decreasing over the past few months. Maybe they've been looking for this one instead of planning new assaults." Collins was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he activated the ship's communication system. "Attention Kithara vessels, this is Admiral Collins of the Human Fleet. We are prepared to return your pack member, but we want assurances that this will lead to peaceful negotiations." The response came immediately through Hunter, who translated the complex musical tones into simpler sounds that seemed directed at Amy. The creature was trying to bridge the communication gap between the two species. Amy listened carefully to Hunter's vocalizations, then looked up at the Admiral. "I think they're agreeing to talks. Hunter is vouching for us." An hour later, Amy stood in the main docking bay with Hunter at her side. The creature had recovered fully from the stun weapons and was practically vibrating with excitement. Through the bay's viewing ports, they could see a Kithara transport ship approaching. The transport docked with surprising gentleness, and the airlock began cycling. Amy felt her heart racing as she prepared to meet other members of Hunter's species. Everything depended on the next few minutes. The airlock opened, and 3 Kithara emerged. They were smaller than Hunter, but moved with the same fluid grace. Their golden eyes immediately locked onto their missing pack member. and the sounds they made were filled with joy and relief. Hunter rushed to meet them, and Amy watched as the creatures embraced with obvious affection. They touched faces and made complex vocalizations that needed no translation. It was a family reunion, pure and simple. One of the newcomers approached Amy slowly, its head tilted in curiosity. Hunter moved between them and made gentle sounds, as if introducing her to its pack. The stranger studied Amy for a moment, then carefully extended one clawed hand. Amy reached out and touched the creature's palm, just as she had done with Hunter weeks ago. The Kithara made a soft sound that reminded her of a cat's purr, and she realized it was showing gratitude. "Thank you," Amy whispered, though she knew the creature couldn't understand her words. It understood her tone, though, and responded with more gentle sounds. Admiral Collins watched from the control room as the Kithara prepared to leave. Hunter approached Amy one final time, nuzzling her gently before following its pack toward their ship. As the transport departed, the largest Kithara warship transmitted a final message. It was complex and musical, but somehow Amy understood its meaning. It was a promise of peace, guaranteed by the bond between a scared creature and the human who had shown it kindness. The war that had raged for years ended not with weapons or treaties, but with a simple act of compassion. Amy had proven that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was understanding, and that even the fiercest predator could become a bridge between worlds when treated with respect and love.